G'day folks, welcome to Stick With It, APA's podcast for its pilots. We've got a really interesting episode today. Joining me are Captain Andy Blair and First Officer Brad Page. If those of you who aren't aware, they were in charge of Qantas Flight 520 back on November the 8th, which departed out of Sydney for Brisbane, had suffered an engine failure right on rotate. They did a fantastic job to manage the problem into the air and then get it back on the ground. What I'm interested in is to talk to both of them today about the events of that flight and also what happened afterwards in terms of managing the subsequent parking at the gate, the passengers, and everything else that happened with that. So welcome to Andy and Brad.
Thank you for having us, Mark.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mark.
I guess to start with, if we go back to the very start of it, in terms of the pattern, was it a day trip or were you guys, because you were heading home to Brisbane, so was it just a day trip or were you on a multi-day pattern? What were you flying that day?
It was a day trip with 3 legs. Brad flew southbound, I flew northbound. So it was my turn to fly for the last leg.
And was it the same aircraft?
No, we had an aircraft swap in Sydney and we got to meet the cabin crew at the coffee shop beforehand because we're waiting for it to come in from Adelaide.
Right, okay. And then you were flying it back one sector back to Brisbane. Now, my memory was that it was a hot day. Is that correct?
It was a warm day, yeah. I think it was about 28 degrees with a westerly. They kept alternating the runways that day, so it was 3-4 right with a little bit of tailwind.
Okay. And were you heavy in terms of big passenger load or what was that like?
Yes, we had tempo forecast for for Brisbane with thunderstorms, and we were a full ship, including a jumpsuit rider. I actually called low control to confirm how much fuel we could take and still get a jumpsuit rider on board.
Right. And in terms of the aircraft, apart from what was about to happen, was the aircraft serviceable or did you have any MELs that had any considerations?
The aircraft was serviceable. There was one MEL for the captain's rad-out being inoperative, which I'd flown before on a 4-sector day. It just means that I've got to use the right autopilot and that for an approach, I've got to turn my flight director off.
Taxied out, nothing untoward, obviously, and then down the long taxi down to runway 34 right. Can you talk us through what happened next?
A normal takeoff roll. It was a bleeds off takeoff, so that's probably worth mentioning. Packs were on the APU. And at or near V1, we got a loss of thrust on the right-hand engine with a bang. And it did seem to occur just a rotation. I remember at the time not knowing exactly what speed had happened, but I knew by the time I recognised that it was an engine failure with EGT going through the red that we were already through V1. My call was go. I believe Brad just called V1 rotate. And we took that aircraft into the air. It was very controllable because it did occur on the ground. The flight recording showed it occurred first drop in thrust of V1 -2, so it was within 1 second of V1. And the recognition, we were through V1 and not much runway left on 34 right.
And so you'd obviously you handed off the thrust lever at that point as you went. And
as I said, go, yes. Yeah.
Now, we've all done this in the sim. This is what I find interesting is obviously it's almost very close to what we practice all the time in the sim. Is it like the sim? Because the sim is trying to get this doof and, a bit of loss of directional control. How similar was it to what we experience in the sim?
It was very similar, very controllable, maybe easier than the simulator in that the sim seems a little twitchy with pitch, but it was very controllable. We didn't seem to deviate from the center line much. I went from a little bit of right rudder with the left crosswind to left rudder to keep it on the center line with the right engine failure. And I was just able to peg the leg and do what we do in the sim. The controllability during rotation was fine. And I think it was just we were acutely aware that first couple of 100 feet, the gear was selected up at 50 feet, but that initial performance is certainly not like an all-engine departure. You're a little more aware of the buildings than you are in the simulator. But for controllability and flying, it was very much like a simulator.
Right. And Brad, from your perspective, thundering down the runway, and then what was the first clue to you? Was it seeing the red on the EGT or hearing it? What's your memory of that?
Yeah, I kind of like transitioned from, checking the engine instruments over to about to call V1 rotate. And then suddenly this loud bang. And I even think like my hand went up, it was so loud. And then it kind of felt like a bit of a shudder. But then obviously Andy was on the control straight away. Then that kind of shudder went away and it rotated. So I initially looked at the engine instruments, a little bit of startle. Saw the EGT go red and then it disappeared. And I was kind of fixated looking at that, trying to, see what the actual problem was. And, I kind of felt like I missed the positive rate call. And Andy kind of went straight away, Pagey, gear up, and then bang, straight into it. And, I kind of thought that time went for a long time, but actually, we'd selected up by 50 feet.
So you mentioned, and that's a good point, you mentioned the startle. I'm really interested in exploring that with both of you a little bit because, we've done a lot of work in the sim with UPRT stuff and recognise, confirm, breathe and all of, the theory of it. And yet we do it in the sim and stuff. But when it happens for real, can you remember sort of any physiological response? I mean, did you get a surge of adrenaline or did your heart go, or was it almost you just didn't have time to think about it? Or how would you describe it?
I don't know. You go into your simulator sessions, you kind of clued up on what's going to happen. Well, this was, third sector of the day. It's a Friday afternoon, been a busy week. It just kind of happens out of nowhere. So I think that startle factor, you can't really, it's not like it is in the sim. But once we kind of got going and into the checklist, it was kind of like, okay, let's just go into sim mode, get the job done. But I think initially it was like, oh my God, what's happening?
Yeah. So did you feel your heart race or anything, or do you remember sort of what it felt like?
I flew with Steve Cornell recently. He's gone, you got to go and watch on. Have you checked to see what your heart rate did? And I've gone, no, I actually haven't. So I logged in there and it went from like 62 beats per minute up to 115 right at that point.
On the day when it happened.
Yeah. So I looked in there and you see the stress levels go, woo, the heart rate go, woo.
But did you find with that, so whilst the body did that, you did the training kick in? Did you feel like, what you'd done?
Yeah, I think it did. Yes, yeah, definitely. I think probably a couple of seconds of startle there, and then it was kind of, okay, let's get into sim mode and see what we have to do.
And Andy, from your perspective, because obviously you're flying the aeroplane, so you got your hands on the controls. How was that startle effect for you, and how did you manage it, or did it happen as you anticipated, or how would you describe it?
Well, obviously there was a shock for me as well. The bang was very audible, and it was an instant loss of thrust. So I just went into my instinctive, keep on the center line with the feet, and I wasn't thinking about how much foot pressure I was putting on. I was just doing whatever it required to keep it on the center line. Could see through the side of my eye that EGT was going red, and then next look was through through the HUD where you can see your speed. So I'm already through V1. I think it was only a 2-knot split. As Brad said, your time does kind of slow down there. And on reflection after we landed, I couldn't tell you that it was within 1 second. I knew it was close to V1. By the time I recognized it, we were through V1. And the rest as pilot flying, I'm just doing what I was trained to do. So I kind of instantly went into that, lock the foot, rotate the aircrafts, and then, noting the climb performance isn't great, get the gear up. And to be honest, Brad may have called positive rate. We can't remember. It's the flight recorder that showed us. I think on initial reflection, I wasn't sure if we'd left it, longer, because time does slow down in that instant and you aren't climbing as well. But it was obvious off 3-4 right. I wanted that gear up efficiently. And then the rest was like we briefed. So, there's probably our most trained maneuver is the V1 cut.
Yeah.
And so the rest of it was basically like I briefed in the pre-flight. So just fly that runway track. And I did get Brad to make a pan call early, probably around 400 feet, for two reasons. I think we had another aircraft behind us. So I had that thought of the Concorde. I thought because the engine failure occurred on the runway, I didn't want somebody else running over it for another takeoff or a landing. And the other thing is we were no longer going to fly the CDP, we were obviously going to fly the CDP. But Brad was great. He was very calm, pan call, told ATC we're maintaining runway track. ATC did not interfere. They just let us continue doing our critical stage of flight. And then instead of 400 feet, I think it was more like probably 700 feet or something like that. That's when I called identify the problem. And I felt at that stage I had the airplane trimmed out and where I wanted it, flying runway track and V2. And the rest of it was pretty methodical, like we've been trained to do.
I think that's.
There was definitely a shock value at first.
I think that's really impressive that you've the brain space to be able to think about traffic behind you. That's unreal in terms of giving that you can think about that. And look, for those playing along at home, if the SID, I can't remember the name of it, but is it NPEG? I think it might be. But effectively, you at 500 feet, you turn about probably 45, 50 degrees to the right and then head out towards the Sydney Heads, whereas the CDP is if you have a problem below 500 feet, you go straight ahead. So, yeah, I was going to ask that. So, obviously, at 400 feet, you made the radio call so that ATC knew where you were going. But as you said, from there, they kind of let you just sort out your problem. They weren't sort of in your face while you were able to identify the problem. They left you alone?
Correct. They just acknowledged the pan and they didn't say anything else, which was great. So, yeah, it just allowed us to continue flying that runway track, get some altitude and carry out the memory items, which we assessed as severe damage based on the nature of the failure, where basically it stopped abruptly and the loud bang and the EGT going through the roof. At that stage, I think when we were in the analysis stage, we had an N2 pretty close to zero, N1 was low, and I thought the EGT gauge still had a red background to it, but it wasn't really indicating anything.
Right.
So yeah, we carried out the memory item just like we do in the training video with I did the auto throttle and the thrust lever with confirmation, and then Brad calmly did the engine start lever and the engine fire switch. And yeah, during the acceleration phase, that was it was very slow to retract flap 1 to flap up because we lost system B engine hydraulic. So I think I asked Brad at that stage to ask for a runway inspection, just thinking that there was a possibility we may have left some bit of metal on the ground. And that's when ATC informed us that there was FOD and that there was fire on that runway. They transferred us to departures, and Brad was calm with all his radio calls. We were both pretty calm. Like, it felt to me like we were calm. And I think I just said to Brad at that stage, when we transferred, let's ask for a return to Sydney on 34 left.
So as you said, you turned out you're both arsonists in terms of you set fire to the airport. But
yes.
Yeah, and how was? I've often wondered about the point where you actually closed the Brad. I guess you closed the engine, the start lever.
Yep. Yes.
How careful are you when you're doing it for real?
Yeah, I actually. I think I hesitated there for a little bit because I knew what the consequences would be if you got the wrong one. So I do remember having a finger there, just kind of having a bit of a pause, like, is this the right one? And then, yeah, Andy's going to do it. I thought, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And you got a good view of the CBD of Sydney, I'm guessing, as you went past?
Passengers would have.
Yeah. I think I was so busy inside at that stage that I wasn't really looking out the window too much. I don't know about Andy, but yeah.
I think just the initial stages of that, the first 200 feet, I was acutely aware that we were lower than we normally are. And, you are flying an instrument that's looking out the window still with a HUD. But, basically, as Brad said, once we got into memory items and then non-normal checklist and return, we were back to just concentrating inside the airplane.
So you clean up, and then in terms of where you go, because often, we talk about lower safes 2700. So often people say we'll climb to 3. Some people say we'll climb to 5, and then we'll go somewhere and we'll work out the problem. So what did you guys do when it was happening for you for real?
We went to 3000. So when we transferred to departures, they offered us a left or right-hand turn, and I would have expected to go right because we're on 34 right, thinking we want to avoid the parallel traffic. But they offered us either. I said to Brad, either's fine. And then I just asked them to maintain 3. I think when they told us that there was fire on the runway we just left, and we didn't know that. We couldn't see behind us. And the airplane was very controllable and felt good. Once we were clean, I did the KARMA acronym, where that's, auto throttle was already disengaged, level change, max continuous, and put the autopilot in. So I think we got that turn roughly around 2,000 feet. And then I thought 3,000, that's a good altitude. It's above MSA. We can come back for an immediate return if we need to. And that was my logic for it. And Brad very calmly relayed that to ATC, and they gave us a left turn. I think it was good for 2 reasons. Probably quicker to get back that way too, and kept us away from the smoke, which we didn't know was there. So we were actually up into the smoke, kept us visual the whole time.
Okay. And in terms of where you then went and held, did you just do a PPOS somewhere where they wanted you to? Would you go and hold over a waypoint? What was the plan with that, Andy?
No, we went and held at Sausage. I think we had Sausage in the fixed page already, and then I got Brad to just go to departures arrivals page, write one for arrivals back to Sydney. He loaded an arrivals, but he was also extremely busy, and I don't think he did that straight away. I think we still did the memory item. We told ATC when we were clean that our intention was to return, and then we commenced the non-normal checklist. So Brad was extremely busy as a PM because there's more tidy up work to be done once you've secured the engine. So he was still busy doing that. I became a little bit less loaded up with the autopilot on, and my first view of that 3-4 ride, I think I interrupted Brad's non-normal checklist management with a holy shit, look at the trail of destruction we've left behind us. We had a jump seat rider too, who was a lovely long-haul flight attendant who'd never been on a 737, and I know
probably never will again.
I hope not, but I'm sure she'll be on it again. Just to look, we've got this under control, and I felt quite calm when we were downwind, even though there was smoke from the runway we just departed. But Sausage was the obvious point to have us ready to come straight back. So that's where initially we just got vectors, and that's all we wanted, with the intent that we could come straight back and land if need be. The airplane was handling really well, and there's still obviously a little bit of checklist work to be done. So Sausage was the best place to sort of, I thought, to have us in a good position to come back if we need to in a hurry. But because of that fire, I actually wanted to know what that right wing looked like. So I did hand over to Brad at some stage when the non-normal checklist and the after takeoff checklist were complete. And I did the NITS briefing with the CSM, and she read it back perfectly. And then I told her, or asked her, do we have any Paxton pilots on board? And she said, we have 3. I said, I give you permission and the pilot to go back and take a picture of that right engine. I want to have a damage assessment before I come back and land, because I wasn't sure if leading edge was going to come out again, or if there was some sort of other damage, given 3-4 right didn't look very good. So she did that while I made the PA. Brad kept flying. I think we entered the hold at that stage. We got the photo back and everything looked intact. So from that point on, I was thinking immediate return initially. And then when I got the photo back, I felt more calm. Brad and I discussed it, and we did the one engine and operative checklist, did the setup, and he did some pilot flying while I got myself ready. And then he handed over just to carry out the completion of the one engine and operative checklist.
So, Brad, did you feel very busy with all those checklists heading sort of on downwind? Was it would you describe it as a high workload?
Yeah, I knew as just before we were about to turn, I thought, this is going to get busy now. So non-normal checklist. Then we did the supplementary checklist as well. Then after takeoff checklist, one engine and operative checklist. Like it was a busy time, but we were methodical about it and we got it done. And as Andy said, once we got that photo back and we knew that the engine was secure, I didn't feel like there was any kind of time pressure from then on.
So just to understand it, so you were actually looking at potentially just a straight back return, immediate return. Initially, you weren't thinking about a holding pattern and running the checklist.
When I saw the fire on the runway, yes, I did think potential for an immediate return. And you can do it from memory if you need to. It's GPWS flap inhibit, it's like flap 15 below the arrival during the aid, and that's why I wanted to be at 3,000 feet as well. Just stabilize the approach. We were about 70 tons for takeoff, and I think we were 68 for landing. As it turns out, after the 2 holds, but that photo. One training captain asked me if he thought it was necessary to have that, and the answer is no, it wasn't necessary. But I thought it was beneficial, just because I didn't expect to see that much fire on the departure runway. We know when we took off there was no fire there. So, and I think from our point of view, and certainly from mine, it was a calming effect to see that the front of the engine looked intact. It didn't look like there was any damage to the wing.
Yeah, well, that seems to me a really strong, a really good decision, given that you've got resources in the cabin. And I'm interested in terms of, you hand it over to Brad. Often, lots of people doing command training at the moment, and with command management sims, Andy, that idea of, did you find giving the flying to Brad, did that take some of the load off you so that you could then talk to the cabin? I mean, did that work as, you might have done in, say, command management sim all those years ago. Did it actually work sort of as advertised on the day?
Yeah, I've got no doubt that Brad could have carried out the communication role as well. He's a very experienced 737 operator. But yeah, I like the technique. It worked for me on the day, and yeah, I have no hesitation for doing it again. Brad was very confident to be able to. We still need some rudder pressure, and I had a little bit of rudder trim, but I like personally to have a little bit of knowledge of dead leg, dead engine, so not too much. It did give me that chance where I'm no longer like making sure I'm nailing the speed and the rudder is spot on. So yeah, by giving it to Brad, even just for maybe one pattern or half a pattern, it did allow me to just do some of that tidy up in the communication work that is necessary with the NITS brief, the PA, which is very much like the NITS brief. And then I think I told ATC in the whole while Brad's still flying after I finished that to just tell our company we're coming back with an engine failure. And so we kind of work our way along the comm panel with talk to the CSM first, give the NITS, do the PA in very much the same format, and then let the company know.
Did you find that obviously with the jump seat, because if the jump seat person wasn't there, would you have got the CSM to come to the flight deck?
Possibly. And actually, when the pilot who took the photos of the wing, he was a Dash 8 pilot. He wanted to come up and join us, but because the jump seat is quite cumbersome in the 737, and we thought we might still be in a position we want to go straight back and land. We said no. We just want the photo. I'll give him the phone back and thank you very much for taking it. Yeah. So I mean, if that jump seat wasn't occupied, it probably would have been easier to do that face to face. But I don't think there was any problem. She wrote down. So I said, I have an emergency NITS briefing. That was my first comms with her. I said, just let me know when you're ready to copy. And then she wrote it down pretty much word for word. She read it back, which was perfect, which I asked her to do as well. And then she used her initiative too, knowing exactly that there were Paxton pilots on board, knowing there's a problem out there. So she was able to get that pilot to get that photo. I think if the jump seat rider wasn't there, we probably maybe would have taken advantage of that pilot, maybe not. But because you can get more information, but we didn't, without knowing what the photo looked like, we may not have, because we still just wanted to be in a position we could go straight back and land if we felt it was necessary.
And was there any commotion in the cabin with regard to passengers? Was everyone calm, seatbelt or fasten belt sign on, just sitting there patiently waiting for you to communicate with them, or so there was no sort of badgering of you guys while you were dealing with it?
No, this was brought up later with when we had a discussion with the cabin crew as well, and in our operational debrief. But the CSM said she made eye contact with the Paxton pilot, and he made a cut the throat signal with the right engine. In other words, that engine had failed. And she said he looked concerned. But she said the rest of the passengers looked pretty calm, and they were able to maintain calm in the cabin too, from what I understand. But obviously Brad and I are busy dealing with the emergency at the time, and their role's different.
Sorry, Brad, you go.
Just circling back to that photo. ATC had mentioned when we asked about the runway inspection, there were bits all over the runway. So I guess, that was another reason to get the photo up, was to see obviously what the engine looked like.
Yeah, that seems like a really smart move if you've, as I said, used the resources available. So how many holding patterns did you end up doing, Brad?
2.
3. Pretty sure it was 3.
Okay.
Or 2? 2. The entry
was 2, but yeah.
It was a couple. Right. And obviously then, prepared for the one engine inoperative. I mean, I guess it would have been comforting knowing you were coming back to the longest runway in Australia. That would have been nice.
Yeah, indeed. I think by that stage it was, we were definitely in sim mode then. Everything was kind of going to plan, and we're just methodically just ticking off each box we had to cover before we came back in.
And Andy, did you guys, with the EP's manual that's talking about, potentially a rough landing or anything like that, preparing the cabin, or did you just think that it was going to be a straightforward one engine inoperative approach and landing? Yeah,
look, for the NITS briefing in this S for special circumstances, I basically told her it would be a normal landing with an engine failed, but we would stop at the end of the runway for an inspection by emergency services. At this stage, no plan for an evacuation. And she read that back to me too, as far as the S goes in its brief.
Okay. So yeah, in terms of then coming in for the landing, I'm assuming, again, much like the sim in terms of, percentage of N1 and controllability, and were you guys looking at just rolling right to Bravo 2, or what was the arrangement with air traffic control about where you were going to stop?
Yeah, I think initially I'd selected flat 15 brakes 3, and then I discussed it with Brad. We went brakes 2 instead. And because we were overweight, even though not grossly overweight, we're 68 tons, yeah, we agreed we'd just we would roll through to the end of 3-4 left, and we asked for permission to do that on approach, which they granted. So yeah, it was to save the brakes and also be in a position that the fireys could get to us in a hurry.
And at this point, you didn't contact the company whilst you're airborne. You just relayed to ATC to let the company know what was going on?
Correct.
And was the frequency congested? I mean, were they having to, send aircraft left, right and centre or different places, or was that were you immune to that? Was that on other frequencies and you guys were just able to do your thing, or were you aware of busyness on the radio frequency?
I could hear the other traffic, but at no point did I think it was getting too busy. I wasn't paying too much attention to what they were doing. I've obviously listened to some of the recordings afterwards, but yeah, we just did our job as we normally do.
So how was the landing, Andy?
It was only about a 15-knot crosswind with a bit of headwind, and it was good.
You nailed it.
So you come to a stop on the runway. I'm assuming so then the fireys come in behind you just for an assessment. You set the brakes, and did you do the alert PA?
Yeah, I set the brakes like I've had to make the alert PA.
And how long did it take for the fireys to make their assessment, or I guess give you permission to return to the gate?
Oh, it was a few minutes on the ground there, probably 10 minutes, I would guess, Brad.
Yeah, I'd say so. It did take a while.
We had a relay from tower to 131.0 for the fire commander, and all their initial assessments were that the engine was looked intact and it didn't look badly damaged. And yeah, but it did take a while for them to investigate and for that information to be passed to us.
Actually, I've got it here written down here. It took us 13 minutes from when you touched down till we got on the gate.
There you go. Yeah, there was a bit of a pause too once we taxied clear, because just prior to getting permission to go onto the gate, fire commander wanted to talk to us again, and he said we actually had a bit of a fluid leak from the right-hand engine. And so that was an added little bit of workload just prior to disembarkation. But we were given permission to go to the parking bay with fire escort, and the whole process on the ground, Brad said 13 minutes. Yeah, it did take a while.
And again, from a human factors perspective, you would have been very busy at that point. But can you remember when you parked the brakes and you were safely back on the ground? How did that feel, Andy? I know
I had the adrenaline rush, so I felt the legs all of a sudden a little bit jelly, a little bit of pumping in the legs. Obviously, the 737 is a very mechanical old school airplane where the rudder is not automatic like an Airbus. So yeah, I didn't notice it during the final approach and flare and landing, but when I set the brakes, I could feel the adrenaline pumping through me then. So I need to take a couple of calming breaths.
Right. And what about you, Brad? How did it feel?
Yeah, the same. I think the adrenaline was running the whole time, to be honest, and probably continue for the rest of the day. But yeah, it was a good feeling getting on the ground. But yeah, it was. I think it was also a bit of sense of satisfaction that we got the job done. Everyone's safe.
Yeah, awesome. So what we'll do is that concludes part one, where we've just sort of talked about the airborne phase of this non-normal event. We're going to record part two, which will talk more about, I guess, what happens after the event. So as I said, that concludes part one. Thanks for everyone to joining us. And again, thanks to Andy and Pagey for joining us. As I said, come back and join us for part two. In the meantime, fly safe and stick with it.